Coming up on Arirang News, the Moon administration pledges to draft a much bigger government budget for next year. The finance minister says it might mean the government runs on a deficit for a while, but it has to be done to deal with external uncertainties. The finance ministry says the South Korean economy does have the resilience to deal with shocks from overseas. The country's credit is good, it says, and foreign currency reserves are strong. And the South Korean military holds a drill aimed at defending the country's easternmost islets of Dokdo. Japan continues to lay false claims to the island and on the same day held a massive military exercise of its own. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for tuning into our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Today, South Korea is wrapping up a two-day maritime drill aimed at defending the country's easternmost islets of Dokdo. And as soon as these drills are over, the government plans to review the time and scale of a second round of drills to be held later this year. Oh Jung-hee starts us off.
South Korea's twice-yearly maritime drill to defend the country's easternmost islets of Dokdo ends on Monday. The drill, which involves the Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard, started on Sunday, only 4 days after Seoul decided to pull out of its bilateral intel-sharing pact with Japan. The size of the armed forces is double that of previous drills. 10 warplanes and 10 warships have been deployed, one of which is Seoul's first Aegis-equipped destroyer, Sejongdo Great, included in the drill for the first time. As soon as the drill wraps up Monday afternoon, the government is to review the time and scale of their second drill of this year. The drills usually take place in June and December every year, but the first drill was delayed until now due to concerns that it could worsen Seoul's relationship with Tokyo. Some say the next drill could be held earlier than usual, as Japan could voice its claims over Dokdo. The drills, which are usually named Dokdo Defense Drill, were named EC Territorial Defense Exercise this year. The name change is to show that Seoul is keeping China and Russia in check as well. Last month, a Russian airplane intruded into South Korean airspace over Dokdo twice, and 2 Chinese and Russian aircraft entered South Korea's air defense identification zone. The name EC Territorial Defense Exercise reflects the military's determination to defend the country's territories in the EC and is likely to be used for the time being. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's presidential office also spoke about the annual maritime defense exercise in the East Sea, saying it's aimed at protecting the country's sovereignty and territory. Speaking to reporters on Sunday, Blue House spokesperson Ko Min-jung said the exercise is aimed at boosting military capabilities against potential threats from quote-unquote all forces, not just from Japan. She added various factors, including weather conditions, had been taken into consideration for this year's exercise. Japan's foreign ministry was quick to criticize the drills, saying the exercises are unacceptable, while falsely claiming that Dokdo is Japan's territory. And in an apparent show of force, Japan's self-defense forces held a major drill on Sunday. Tokyo-based NHK and Kyodo News Agency reported that some 2,400 self-defense members, 80 tanks, armored vehicles, as well as aircraft took part in the 2-hour drill. The exercise is said to have focused on checking the defense capability of Japan's land forces. It came on the same day that South Korea began its biannual maritime drills for the defense of Dokdo. U.S. President Donald Trump and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe are at odds over the seriousness of North Korea's recent missile launches. While Abe said the launches violate UN sanctions, Trump said not really. Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
Holding a one-on-one meeting on the sidelines of the G7 meeting in France on Sunday, it quickly became clear that the leaders of the U.S. and Japan had opposing views on North Korea's latest missile tests.
So our position is very clear that the launch of short-range ballistic missiles by North Korea clearly violates the relevant UN Security Council resolution. So in that sense, it wasn't extremely regrettable for us to experience another round of missile launches by North Korea.
However, according to President Trump, the regime's missile tests were not a violation of UN Security Council resolutions.
I'm not happy about it, but again, he's not in violation of an agreement.
The comments come after North Korea's 7th missile test since Trump and Kim met at the DMZ between the two Koreas in June. While the launches have complicated attempts to restart talks between Washington and Pyongyang, Trump said he remained confident North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will do what he says is the right thing.
I have confidence that in the end, Kim Jong-un, who I've gotten to know very well, will do the right thing. I feel that he will do the right thing. I think it's to his advantage to do the right thing.
It's not the first time the two leaders have not seen eye to eye on North Korea. Trump has previously downplayed North Korea's missile provocations, despite Abe's concerns during the U.S. leader's visit to Tokyo in May. However, there was an issue the two leaders could get behind. Trump announced that he and Abe had agreed in principle to a new trade deal that will likely be signed when the two sides meet again at the UN General Assembly in September. The deal means Japan will buy excess U.S. corn, and such purchases would be carried out by the private sector. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer says the deal would open up markets to over $7 billion worth of goods and covered agriculture, industrial tariffs, and digital trade. 이승재, Arirang News.
Also during their meeting, Trump told Abe that he received a new letter from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un saying that Kim was upset over the South Korea-U.S. joint military drills. Although Trump acknowledged the recent joint exercises were a modified version compared to previous large-scale drills, he still labeled them as a, quote, total waste of money. The American president even said that he would not recommend not holding the exercises, but will let the allies continue if necessary. South Korea solidified its ties with Ethiopia today. President Moon Jae-in held a bilateral summit in Seoul this afternoon with the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali. Before they went into their meeting, President Moon highlighted Ethiopia's support for South Korea in the Korean War in the early 1950s, when the Ethiopian emperor at the time sent troops to fight as part of the UN forces defending the South. In today's meeting, the two leaders reaffirmed their support for regional peace initiatives in their respective regions. They also have agreed on boosting bilateral cooperation on multiple fronts, including investment, science, and technology, as well as tackling climate change. Abiy is the first African leader to be hosted by the Moon administration. The pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong on Sunday was one of the most violent ones seen in over 12 weeks. Police used the strongest force yet, with water cannons, tear gas, and even a warning gunshot. Kim Da-mi has the details.
Hong Kong police deployed water cannons and live ammunition, firing a warning shot for the first time on Sunday. Hundreds of thousands of protesters poured onto the streets and clashed with police in the new territories. Police accused the demonstrators of throwing bricks, which prompted them to fire tear gas and use water cannons. A police officer fired at least one gunshot for the first time in 3 months of protest. Police said an officer had fired into the air because he felt his life was threatened. It was unclear where the shot was aimed, but it was fired toward the sky. And a female Hong Kong protester arrested during a demonstration on Friday has accused a female Hong Kong police officer of conducting a humiliating and unnecessary body search. On Saturday, a senior Hong Kong official hinted at mainland China possibly intervening militarily to quell the protest. Maria Tam, deputy director of the Hong Kong Basic Law Committee, said soldiers stationed close to Hong Kong are not strawmen meant to just stay in the garrison. They're an important part of the one country, two systems. Hong Kong's civil groups will hold an extradition law and Me Too protest in Charter Garden and Central District on Wednesday night. The protest began in June over a controversial but now scrapped extradition law. They now focus on greater democratic freedoms, including an inquiry into alleged police brutality. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea's ruling party and the government have pledged to draw up a much bigger state budget for next year. In a final review this morning, they agreed to actively use fiscal measures given the headwinds facing the country, such as the escalating trade spat with Japan and trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Here's the finance minister.
Taking an aggressive fiscal role now is more important than ever. The government will draft an expansionary budget for next year, even if it means running a temporary fiscal deficit. We'll also take efforts to manage fiscal soundness in the mid to long run.
Seoul's finance chief said last week that the budget would be worth roughly $420 billion, a hike of about 9% on year. If approved by the National Assembly, the budget would raise the country's debt to GDP ratio to the upper end of 39% from the 37.2% for this year. The government says the core of the plan is to breathe life into the economy, boost people's livelihoods, and deal with Japan's export curbs. Over $1.6 billion will be set aside for the parts and materials sectors to help them develop homegrown tech and reduce their dependency on Japan. The government will finalize the budget at a cabinet meeting on Thursday and submit it to the National Assembly on September 3rd. President Moon Jae-in has put his money where his mouth is and has newly invested in an equity fund that invests in Korean companies that might benefit from government support to deal with Japan's trade restrictions on Korea. Launched earlier this month, it's known as the NH Amundi Victorious Korea Equity Fund, and it donates half its performance fees to South Korean firms in the materials and parts sector, especially those affected by Japan's export curbs. The South Korean government is trying to help these companies so that Korea becomes more self-sufficient in those sectors. Moon is the first South Korean president to have publicly invested in financial instruments during his term in office. South Korea and Japan met again over the weekend on the sidelines of the meeting of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, in Indonesia. South Korea's Trade Ministry announced Monday that its Deputy Minister for Trade Negotiations, Yo Han-gu, met with Japan's Deputy Assistant Minister for Southeast and Southwest Asian Affairs Department, Yasuhiko Yoshida. There, Yo reportedly urged Japan to lift its trade restrictions on Seoul, saying they could seriously harm the regional supply chain. He said the trade curbs are unilateral, groundless, a violation of the principle of free trade and the spirit of RCEP. At the RCEP meeting, Yo stressed the need for a transparent system of free trade as the region works toward a free trade agreement. It's time now for an in-depth look at the market action as we start the week. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, global strategist, research fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Well, now, China announced new retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. last Friday, and that sent stocks on Wall Street plunging. The Dow down 2.3%, the Nasdaq 3%, and the S&P over 2.5% as well. Today, Korean stocks are following suit. What's the story?
U.S. stocks slumped and Treasury rallied as the trade dispute between the world's two largest economies deepened. After the close of regular trading, President Donald Trump confirmed he will boost tariffs on Chinese imports in response to Beijing's retaliation. Prospects for heightened tension rattled markets Friday, overshadowing speculation that the Federal Reserve will cut rates after Chairman Jerome Powell's remarks. The trade war escalation rekindled concerns about the outlook for global growth that's already looking shaky. The bond market's recession indicator, the spread between 2- and 10-year rates, flirted with inversion again. Asian shares all sank on Monday as the latest attack from the Sino-U.S. trade war shook confidence in the world economy and sent investors steaming to the safe harbors of sovereign bonds and gold, while slugging emerging market currencies. Japan's Nikkei lost 2.17%, and Korea's Kospi and Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 1.64% and 2.97%, respectively.
Well, speaking of the trade war, at the G7 summit in France, President Trump was asked by a reporter whether he has any regrets about the trade war with China. He said, sure, why not? He has second thoughts about everything, he said. And that comment the White House now says was greatly misinterpreted. What do you think Trump meant by that?
After Trump appeared to soften his stance on China tariffs in Biarritz, France, his aides swooped to explain he wasn't backing down. His aide's statement underscores the president's disdain for being seen as weak or backing down in the face of criticism. But it also reflected the back-and-forth nature of Mr. Trump's trade confrontation with China, which has shifted between negotiations, threats conveyed over Twitter, and a series of escalating tariffs. Last week, after China announced retaliatory tariffs on $75 billion in American goods, Mr. Trump reacted furiously. In a series of tweets, he condemned China's intransigence and vowed to impose even higher tariffs on a broader set of Chinese products. It seemed on Sunday morning that his attitude had shifted until Ms. Grisham said it had not, at least for now. Considering all of Trump's reactions, we need to reasonably expect his back-and-forth strategies toward China to be maintained until the trade deal agreed.
All right, this week we'll see Japan officially taking Korea off its white list of trading partners. The measure announced several weeks ago. Also, the Bank of Korea holding the meeting in which it sets interest rates. That and what else should we be watching this week?
Investors are highly interested in events this week, such as U.S.-China trade war proceedings, detailed actions in Japanese export restrictions against Korea, and BOK monetary policy meeting. Japan's decision to drop South Korea from a list of favored economic partner goes into effect on this coming Wednesday, after which Japanese companies will have to go through additional procedures to export more than 800 strategic materials to South Korea, potentially delaying such exports by weeks or even months. The Bank of Korea will hold its rate-setting monetary policy board meeting on this coming Friday. Even with growing economic uncertainties and ongoing trade tensions with Japan, the South Korean Central Bank is highly likely to freeze the base interest rate at an upcoming meeting. Many see the need for additional rate cuts, but some question the effectiveness of further rate reductions, while also insisting the country may quickly run out of options if it moves too soon.
All right, Dr. Huang, we'll be watching those, and that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thank you, as always, for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Now, with the economic uncertainties growing around the world, South Korea's finance ministry thinks the country has the ability to cushion itself from external shocks. In a meeting with related institutions today, the Vice Minister of Finance, Kim Yong-bum, said South Korea has the economic resilience to fight off various economic risks and that it's important to deal with the current situations in a calm and rational manner. Kim said the world is seeing investors move into safe havens, a decline in major stock markets, and lower yields on bonds. He added that despite all the uncertainties, South Korea has maintained a good credit rating and strong foreign exchange reserves. Government data on household income shows that inequality between the top and bottom 20% brackets has reached a new high. But the presidential office insists the figures are not a true reflection of what's really happening. Oh Soo-young reports.
The presidential office of Cheong-adae insists income inequality in South Korea has not worsened despite recent government data that paints a different picture. Statistics Korea's second quarter data released last week seems to indicate the worst level of household income inequality in more than a decade. Between April and June, the average household earned around $3,900 a month, up 3.8% on year. However, the monthly income for the bottom 20% income bracket remained unchanged from the year before, averaging $1,090. The top 20% earned nearly $7,800 a month on average, marking a 3.2% increase compared to the same period in 2018. This comes despite the Moon Jae-in administration's push to generate income-driven growth for the country. Cheong-adae defended its efforts. The top office's senior secretary for economic affairs Lee Ho-sung said Sunday that the average income for the bottom 20% bracket was no longer in the red, which he said should be viewed positively. He said various policy efforts, such as strengthening social safety nets, has had a positive effect, and the average household income level for 2018 to 2019 is comparatively higher than previous years. The official added some $33 billion will be set aside for next year's government budget, nearly half of which will be invested in social welfare. Seoul, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics has been ranked 4th in the world in terms of the health of its brand, and it's the only Asian company in the top 10. That's according to a yearly report by global polling company YouGov. Though Samsung was a notch lower than last year, this is the second year in a row it's made the top 5. Samsung's mobile brand Galaxy also came 23rd on the same list. The Brand Health Index evaluates global companies from 29 countries based on 6 categories such as quality, value, and reputation. Topping the list was Google, followed by WhatsApp and YouTube. Samsung beat Facebook and Amazon, which were ranked 5th and 6th, respectively. There are warning signs around the world of a recession possibly on the way. A recession's when the economy shrinks for 2 quarters in a row. Our business correspondent Kim Hae-sung explains what the signs of a recession are and the ones we're already seeing.
The U.S. bond market is sounding the alarm of a possible recession. The spread between the 2-year Treasury yield and the 10-year yield inverted for the first time since 2007 on August 14th.
An inverted yield curve is a bellwether for an economic recession. Long-term bills have a higher risk premiums and therefore lower yields. But a higher 10-year yield means investors believe they will make more by holding a long-term treasury, expecting the value of a short-term bills to plunge as the economy slows.
According to Credit Suisse, the last 5 inverted yield curves all led to recessions that happened an average of 22 months following an inversion. Britain also saw an inverted yield curve, and Germany's Treasury bond yields are heading further down into negative territory. The price of gold, the go-to safe haven for many investors, is at a 6-year high. The real economy is also losing steam. China saw its second quarter growth hit its slowest pace in near 30 years. South Korea recorded negative growth in the first quarter. 2 other export powerhouses, Germany and Singapore, also saw their economies contract in the second quarter on falling global demand. While the U.S. is still enjoying solid economic growth, its manufacturing August PMI fell below the 50 mark for the first time since 2009, indicating a near-term manufacturing contraction.
The problem of low productivity and the widening wealth gap remains unsolved since the 2008 global financial crisis. Interest rates are at record lows, yet supply is higher than demand. In addition, new factors like the U.S.-China trade war are accelerating the slowdown.
The U.S.-China trade spat has not only led to higher tariffs between the world's 2 largest economies, hurting consumers and exports, but also added uncertainties to businesses, driving down investment. A no-deal Brexit pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong and tensions between South Korea and Japan also add to downside risks. It remains to be seen whether the warning signs will lead to a recession, but rising populist sentiment and protectionism is making it harder for world leaders to work in unison to support the global economy. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
President Trump over the weekend said he's had second thoughts about the trade war with China, a comment that's caused some controversy. Now the White House has clarified that what he regrets is not raising tariffs higher. That's according to White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, who said Trump's comments had been greatly misinterpreted. The remarks come after Trump declared a tariff hike on Chinese goods in response to Beijing's decision last Friday to place $75 billion worth of duties on American imports. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.